And I am a live witness to hundreds of Syrians and some Lebanese that, because of their activism, their human rights work, or who they are, were thrown in prisons. And I am a witness to their suffering every day.
Welcome to Global Dispatches, a podcast for the foreign policy and global development communities and anyone who wants a deeper understanding of what is driving events in the world today. I'm your host, Mark Leon Goldberg. I am a veteran international affairs journalist and the editor of UN Dispatch. Enjoy the show. When Damascus was liberated in December of last year and Bashar al-Assad fled to Moscow, millions of people who had fled Syria began returning home. It was a joyous occasion for so many people who had lived as refugees in neighboring countries, including in Lebanon, which hosted more Syrian refugees than any other country. The new authorities in Damascus are welcoming and encouraging those who fled to return and help rebuild the country after over a decade of war. But there are hundreds, possibly even thousands of Syrians who are unable to return because they are being held as political prisoners in Lebanon. Most, if not all of these prisoners, are being detained by Hezbollah for their activities opposing the Assad regime, which was a key Hezbollah ally. In today's episode, I speak with one of those detainees, whom I will call Omar, who managed to smuggle a phone into the Rumia prison in Lebanon. Omar was detained in 2024, but prior to that, he worked to expose the mass detention by Hezbollah of Syrian opposition activists. In our conversation, he tells his story and that of his fellow detainees. This episode came about through a chance encounter with Moaz Mustafa as we were both attending the Halifax International Security Forum last week. Moaz is director of the Syria Emergency Task Force and is someone who has played a key role in supporting the democratic transition of Syria since the fall of the Assad regime and has played a long role in supporting human rights in Syria throughout this conflict. I actually met Moaz a couple of years ago at this same conference, and when I ran into him at Halifax this year, he pitched me on this story and offered to translate the interview. So you'll hear Moaz Mustafa translating my conversation with Omar, and then following my conversation with Omar, Moaz will speak with me directly about the broader context in which these detainees are being held and what may convince Hezbollah and the Lebanese authorities to finally let these political prisoners go home to Syria. So here's my conversation with Omar, who speaks with me from a prison in Lebanon, translated by Moaz Mustafa. Can you tell me the circumstances in which you fled Syria for Lebanon?
So in the areas that I lived in, which were in Syria but close to the Lebanese border, were retaken by the Assad regime. As soon as Assad regime security forces were threatening to come in and take over the areas, we ran away. I went to Lebanon, and I went to Lebanon for asylum. Anyone that is in an opposition or part of the revolution would be arrested, tortured to death, in best case scenario, just killed right away. Fearing for my life, that's why we ran and took refuge in Lebanon.
And when you arrived in Lebanon, what did you do? How did you sustain yourself?
It was really tough. The United Nations and the Red Cross, NGOs would help sometimes, whether it's food or helping with temporary shelter. And when they didn't have anything to be able to help and support, just kind of finding any side job to try to make money. But since arriving in Lebanon, it was essentially just misery and suffering, trying to survive every day, but having to be there to escape Assad and the regime.
What were the circumstances around your arrest?
So one night, the tent that I was living in Lebanon, there was a raid by Lebanese security forces, intelligence. They came into my tent, they arrested me and brought me to prison. And the reasoning for their arrest is that I was a human rights activist. I was documenting abuses being done by Hezbollah against Syrians. I was documenting the disappearances even of Syrian refugees that were in Lebanon. And those were the reasons I was arrested from my tent. And I am a live witness to hundreds of Syrians and some Lebanese that because of their activism, their human rights work, or who they are, were thrown in prisons, and I am a witness to their suffering every day. Of course, all of us and all of these Syrians that I'm describing did not break any Lebanese law for their arrest. We are, and they are all simply here in this prison because we took a political position that opposed the Assad regime. Lebanon is under a lot of control by Lebanon and Hezbollah, which in a place where Hezbollah and Iran has so much influence, free expression of your opinion is a criminal offense that you would get arrested for. When Hezbollah and Assad regime forces retook the Syrian areas on the border with Lebanon, like al-Qusayr and other towns, thousands of Syrians had to flee right away to Lebanon in order to escape the Hezbollah and regime takeover of their towns. By the way, these people in the thousands were just refugees. They were not fighters and they were not extremists by any stretch. We were simply citizens that took a political position in a peaceful way, displayed a political opinion, because we believed in a revolution that valued freedom, dignity, and liberty. The year of 2014 was a very dangerous inflection point because in that year, there was a systematic effort at mass detainment and arrests, especially in the Syrian refugee camps across Lebanon, especially near Arsal, Arsal. These raids and these arrests were done in direct coordination and under direct command of Hezbollah. And this was under the guise of going after people who were part of the opposition in the Qalamun Mountains. These are mountain range that divides Syria and Lebanon. It was Hezbollah actual officers that were wearing Lebanese military uniforms to disguise their specific affiliation that took part in these massive raids.
Mm-hmm. And it was in these raids that he was detained initially.
وبهاي الحملات كان اعتقالك؟ لا. No. هذه الحملات ب 2013. This was in 2014. أنا اعتقلت ب 2024. I was arrested in the very beginning of 2024. But starting in 2014, these prisoners had been in there.
Okay.
So they ended up raiding hundreds of camps, arresting hundreds of people, and those detainees were subjected to horrible torture. These were all documented, the torture and what happened, and a lot of them ended up dying, with their own family members witnessing their death under torture and detention. Mm-hmm. At the same time, it wasn't just refugee camps that were raided and people detained, but also public hospitals were raided, and those that were wounded from the war were detained as well. It is a total of 480.
What do you hope will happen now that there is a new government in Syria?
Unfortunately, the new Syrian government has done all it can and put a lot of efforts to try to get us out. But unfortunately, so far, they've not been able to. Hezbollah retains massive control over our future. People have to understand in the world the amount of leverage and control Hezbollah and Iran has in Lebanon today. Mm-hmm. Their control goes beyond just security forces in the military, but it includes the intelligence and the judicial system of the Lebanese state. And so Hezbollah is way more entrenched in Lebanon that people know, giving it the ability to paralyze national decision-making and flout justice. And they have transformed Lebanese institutions into tools of a terrorist organization called Hezbollah. And he says, finally, and I know you have to go, as we are in jail with, with hundreds of other Syrians that did nothing and are peaceful, Lebanon, because of Hezbollah, protects senior officers of the Assad regime, some of which have information on where missing American bodies are, and some of them were liable for the death of American citizens. And he says that's an important thing to tell the world. Not only are they holding us, but they're giving sanctuary to war criminals.
Well, thank you for your time, and I very much hope to visit you in Damascus very soon.
كثير على وقتك، وكثير بيتمنى انه انت وياه تتقابلوا بدمشق بوقت قريب جدا. ان شاء الله.
Now here is my conversation with Moaz Mustafa, head of the Syria Emergency Task Force. You and I met each other here in Halifax a couple years ago. I wouldn't call you a behind-the-scenes operator. You're literally like in front of the microphone right now out in public. I would describe you as like a Syria problem solver. And a lot of the progress towards democracy that we've seen unfold over the last several months, you've had a direct hand in. So thank you for doing what you do.
Thank you.
How do you know?
So met virtually quite a few years ago. He had run away from Syria as Hezbollah and Iran and the Assad regime were retaking territories that they had lost earlier in the revolution. And it's really, the last 15 years have been tough, especially the very last few years before liberation, because, some of the people in the world wanted to normalize with Assad. Assad was kind of retaking control, and had run away to Lebanon in order to escape being arrested or killed by Assad or Hezbollah. And when I got to know him, he was reaching out to tell me about the situation of refugees in Lebanon, the fact that there's been so much discrimination against them, the fact that there's been a lot of human rights abuses. And he was raising with me a very important point that there were many Syrians arrested by Hezbollah and placed in Lebanese jail because they peacefully protested or displayed any disaffection with the Assad regime. And at the time, he was also trying to advocate on their release. Actually, at the time, Hezbollah wanted to deport those prisoners to Assad regime custody, which would have been a death sentence right away. Ironically, when the Assad regime fell, Hezbollah then decided, we don't want to deport them. We want to keep them where they are abused, tortured. Some of them have committed suicide just because of despair. The whole country's free, yet the last remaining prisoners of the revolution are in a Hezbollah jail in Lebanon.
So Hezbollah has been really widely depleted and degraded over the last year and a half, principally as a consequence of Israeli military action. But apparently they still hold significant political sway in Lebanon to the extent that they have hundreds of these detainees. We don't really know how many, hundreds, maybe thousands of detainees, who were Assad opposition activists, now languishing in prison. And the point you make that these are really like the last political prisoners remaining from the Syrian revolution. What can be done to secure their release?
It's absolutely right that, the Israeli attacks really depleted Hezbollah, decapitated their leadership. And that was really key because it also helped the drive to liberate Syria, where Hezbollah plays an important role. But what I think people miss is that Hezbollah is not gone, that Hezbollah remains something that is so entrenched within Lebanese institutions as this terrorist organizations that, has worked, frankly, against the interests of Lebanon. And what is very profound, shocking, appalling, it's hard to process, that after the liberation of Syria, hundreds, if not thousands, of Syrians remain in this Hezbollah prison under a Hezbollah and Iranian-controlled court that oversees them, while thousands of their family members in Syria continue to demand their release. The new Syrian government demands their release. but they're still in jail. It's probably the most heartbreaking story. And I think it's really, really important for not just the Syrian government, which is doing all it can, but for the United States and for Western democracies and for anyone who cares about human rights to push the Lebanese government to allow these people to go, despite the fact that Hezbollah shackles Lebanon's progress.
So, I mean, the point you made about this kind of being heartbreaking, I recall those really powerful images after the fall of Assad, where you had just crowded streets, traffic jams of people headed back to Damascus, headed back to Syria, and thinking back, 15 years ago, just the opposite migration and an outflow of people, and to see people like wanting to go back, demanding to go back, wanting to return to their homes. Yet you have these people who are essentially political prisoners of an Assad ally, despite the fact that Assad has been ousted. It's just seems profoundly unjust.
Oh, it is the most unjust thing. I mean, you have already 2 million people have returned to Syria since liberation. People's families are reuniting. There were so many thousands of prisoners in Assad's jail. And I was there days after the fall. I got to see these people coming out of jail, sometimes children, men, women, elderly, and to see the joy and relief and disbelief that Assad is finally gone and freedom has come. And the fact that there are now hundreds, if not thousands, of Syrian prisoners whose only crime was that they wanted democracy, liberty, freedom, dignity, same values that we share here in the United States. And that's their crime. And Hezbollah is keeping them in these horrific conditions is something that is, as you say, profoundly unjust. And I don't think, anyone can truly celebrate in Syria until these final prisoners of this revolution that changed the world, frankly, are out.
And presumably the Lebanese government itself is too weak to just demand their release, to, impose these demands on Hezbollah. So is there any pressure that could be brought to bear on Hezbollah to release these detainees?
Well, I think it's really, really important, number one, to highlight what's happening. The Syrian government's done all it can, and a lot in the Lebanese government would like to see these people released. But it shows two things. Number one, how entrenched and how in control Hezbollah is of Lebanon. That's an important national security and regional security issue. And it's exemplified by these people that are still in jail. So I do think that if there's a lot of attention put on this is an unjust case, it highlights, number one, the danger that Hezbollah continues to present to the region, specifically to Lebanon. And I think it increases pressure on Hezbollah and on that military court to release these prisoners. That will take members of Congress calling this out publicly and reaching out to Lebanese embassy. It takes, amazing journalists like yourself really telling this story and amplifying it as much as possible. And I think, look, this is a collective effort of all free people and free governments to raise their voice. And I believe that enough political and media pressure will force Hezbollah to let these people go, while we must do all we can to empower Lebanon to be independent of this terrorist group. Lebanon deserves to be free of Hezbollah, just like, thank God, Syria became free of Hezbollah.
Well, Maaz, thank you so much for your time and for your work and for your translation services as well.
My pleasure. Thank you.
Thanks for listening to Global Dispatches. The show is produced by me, Mark Leon Goldberg. It is edited and mixed by Levi Sharp. If you are listening on Apple Podcasts, make sure to follow the show and enable automatic downloads to get new episodes as soon as they're released. On Spotify, tap the bell icon to get a notification when we publish new episodes. And of course, please visit globaldispatches.org to get on our free mailing list, get in touch with me, and access our full archive. Thank you.